Liana Moretti stood in the luxurious kitchen, heart-pounding as Roman DeLuca walked in, the most powerful man in the city, the Mafia boss she'd loved silently through every breakfast she prepared. But today was different. His eyes lingered on her longer than usual. Vivienne DeLuca, his perceptive mother, had already noticed what Liana tried desperately to hide. That the quiet cook wasn't just devoted to her job, she was hopelessly, dangerously in love with a man who trusted no one. In a world built on violence and betrayal, could genuine love survive? Stay until the end, hit like, and comment your city so I can see how far this story travels. The kitchen of the DeLuca estate was a cathedral of marble and steel, where sunlight filtered through tall windows and caught the copper pots hanging like holy relics above the island. Liana had been working here for 8 months, and every single morning followed the same ritual. She arrived at 5:30, before the guards changed shifts, before the house staff began their rounds, before Roman DeLuca descended the curved staircase with that particular heaviness in his step that told her whether he'd slept or spent another night in his office with a glass of whiskey and problems she couldn't imagine. She knew things about him that no one else did. Not the enforcers who carried out his orders, not the lawyers who cleaned up his messes. Not even Vivian, his mother, who'd hired Liana from a culinary school placement program and told her simply, "My son needs someone who understands that food is more than fuel." Liana understood. She understood that Roman took his espresso with exactly 1 sugar cube, never 2. That he preferred his eggs over medium, the yolk still liquid but not runny. That on Tuesdays he ate lighter because he had meetings that required him to stay sharp. And on Fridays, he wanted something that reminded him of his grandmother's cooking, even though he never said so directly. She learned these things through observation, through the plates he finished and the ones he left half-touched, through the almost imperceptible softening around his eyes when something tasted exactly right. She learned them because she was in love with him, and love made you a detective of details, a scholar of silence. This morning, she was making fresh pasta. Her hands worked the dough with practiced efficiency, kneading and folding, while her mind traced the same well-worn path it always did, analyzing the impossibility of her situation with the same futility as trying to solve an equation that had no answer. Roman DeLuca was 32, 9 years older than her, and commanded an empire that stretched across 3 states. She was a cook with a culinary degree from a modest program, an orphan who'd grown up in foster care, someone so far removed from his world that loving him felt like standing at the base of a mountain and dreaming of touching the sky. "You're here early." Liana's hands stilled in the dough. She hadn't heard him come in. Roman moved like winter itself, silent, inevitable, changing the temperature of every room he entered. "I'm always here at this time, Mr. DeLuca." She kept her voice steady, professional, even as her pulse kicked into high gear. Roman. He'd been telling her this for 3 months now. Just Roman. She still couldn't bring herself to say it. The informality felt dangerous, like stepping across a line she couldn't uncross. He moved closer, and she felt rather than saw him settle into one of the bar stools across the island from her. This was new. Usually he took his breakfast in the dining room or his office. He didn't linger in the kitchen, didn't watch her work. "What are you making?" "Cacio e pepe." "I thought—" She stopped herself. "I thought you might want something simple today, something that tastes like comfort. I thought you looked tired yesterday, like the weight of everything was pressing down harder than usual, and I wanted to give you something that might ease it, even just for a few minutes." "You thought what?" "I thought you might enjoy it." Safe, neutral. Roman was quiet for a moment, and Liana felt his gaze on her hands as she worked. She'd been told her whole life that she had beautiful hands, long fingers, graceful movements, the hands of an artist. Right now they felt clumsy and conspicuous under his attention. "My grandmother used to make that," he said finally. "On Sundays after church. She'd stand at the stove and refuse any help. Said the timing had to be exact or the cheese would clump." Liana's chest tightened. He'd never shared anything personal before. Never offered a memory. A piece of himself that wasn't filtered through the careful distance he maintained with everyone. "The key is the pasta water," she heard herself saying. "The starch helps emulsify the cheese and pepper. Most people don't use enough of it." "You know what you're doing." It wasn't quite a question, but she answered anyway. "I try." That's not what I meant. Roman leaned forward slightly, and now Liana had no choice but to look up, to meet those dark eyes that had haunted her thoughts for 8 months straight. You don't just cook, you pay attention, you notice things. Her hands had stopped moving entirely. The dough sat abandoned on the marble counter between them. It's my job to notice, she said quietly. No. His voice was soft but certain. It's something else. The moment stretched taut as wire. Liana felt exposed, like he could see straight through her careful professionalism to the desperate, foolish truth underneath. She loved him. She loved the way he carried his authority with quiet certainty rather than loud demands. She loved that he never yelled at his staff, never threw his power around inside his own home, even though outside these walls he was feared by men who'd built their own reputations on violence. She loved the rare moments when his expression softened, when something almost like peace crossed his face before he remembered himself and locked it away again. The sound of heels on marble shattered the tension. Vivienne DeLuca entered the kitchen in a dove-gray silk robe, her silver hair perfectly styled even at 6 in the morning, diamonds glinting at her ears and throat. "Good morning, darling." She crossed to Roman and kissed his cheek before turning to Liana with a warm smile. "And good morning, Liana. Something smells wonderful already." "Cacio e pepe, Mrs. DeLuca. I'll have breakfast ready in 20 minutes. "Perfect. Roman, walk with me in the garden? I want to discuss the charity gala." Roman stood, and for just a second his eyes caught Liana's again. Then he was gone, following his mother through the French doors that led to the terrace, and Liana was alone with her racing heart and the pasta dough that needed to rest before she could roll it out. She pressed her palms flat against the cool marble and took a slow breath. This was dangerous. Whatever had just happened, whatever door had cracked open between them, she needed to close it, fast. But even as she thought it, she knew she couldn't. The DeLuca estate sat on 47 acres of manicured grounds, surrounded by walls that could stop a small army and patrolled by guards who carried enough firepower to start a small war. Liana had learned early not to ask questions about what Roman did, who visited in the middle of the night, why certain rooms were always locked, why phones were never allowed at the dinner table. She'd also learned that despite the violence implicit in every security measure and locked door, the household itself ran on a kind of old-world civility that surprised her. Vivienne insisted on fresh flowers in every room. Roman said please and thank you to the staff. Sunday dinners were formal affairs with china and crystal and conversation that carefully avoided business. It was like living in two worlds at once, the brutal reality of what sustained their wealth and comfort, and the gracious fiction they maintained inside these walls. Liana had grown up with neither wealth nor grace. The foster homes had ranged from neglectful to outright cruel, and she'd learned to make herself invisible, useful, indispensable. Cooking had been her escape, and eventually her salvation. In the kitchen, she had control. She could create something beautiful from raw ingredients, could transform chaos into order, could make people happy with her hands and her attention. When the culinary school placement coordinator had told her about the position with the DeLuca family, she'd hesitated. She knew the name, knew the rumors. But the salary was triple what she'd expected, and Vivienne had interviewed her personally, asking questions about technique and philosophy rather than experience. "I don't need someone who went to Le Cordon Bleu," Vivienne had said, watching Liana with those sharp, assessing eyes. "I need someone who understands that cooking is an act of care. My son has forgotten what that feels like. I'd like you to remind him." Liana had taken the job, and somewhere between the first breakfast and the 100th, between learning his preferences and anticipating his needs, she'd fallen completely, irrevocably in love with a man she barely knew and could never have. The rest of the day followed its usual pattern. Liana prepared lunch, a light salad with grilled chicken for Vivienne, a sandwich that Roman ate at his desk while reviewing contracts. Dinner was more elaborate, a 4-course meal served in the formal dining room with Vivienne presiding over conversation about art exhibitions and foundation work, while Roman listened with patient attention. Liana served each course herself, moving through the dining room with practiced efficiency, pouring wine and clearing plates and trying not to notice how Roman's gaze followed her movements. After dinner, she cleaned the kitchen with meticulous care, washing each pot and pan, wiping down every surface, preparing ingredients for tomorrow's breakfast. The ritual calmed her, gave her hands something to do while her mind spun. She was rinsing the last cutting board when Vivian appeared in the doorway. "Liana, dear, do you have a moment?" "Of course, Mrs. DeLuca." Liana dried her hands and turned, trying to read the older woman's expression. Vivian moved into the kitchen, trailing one elegant hand along the marble countertop. "I wanted to thank you for breakfast this morning. Roman mentioned it was particularly good. I'm glad he enjoyed it." "He did more than enjoy it." Vivian's eyes, the same dark brown as her son's, studied Liana with uncomfortable intensity. "He talked about it. About you. That's unusual for him." Liana's stomach dropped. "I just try to do my job well." "Yes, I've noticed." Vivian was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was gentler. "You care about him." It wasn't a question. Liana felt her carefully constructed walls crumbling. "Mrs. DeLuca, I would never—" "I know." Vivian held up one hand, diamonds flashing. "I know you wouldn't presume. You're far too careful for that. But I also know what I see when you look at my son, and what I see when he looks at you when he thinks no one's watching." Heat flooded Liana's face. "I'm sorry. If I've made things uncomfortable, I can—" "Don't apologize." Vivian's voice was suddenly firm. "And don't you dare offer to leave. Do you know how many women have tried to get close to Roman? Beautiful women, connected women, women who see him as a prize to be won or a weapon to be wielded." Liana shook her head mutely. "Dozens, hundreds maybe. And do you know how many he's trusted? How many he's let past the walls he built after his father died, and he had to take over the business at 24? No, ma'am. None." Vivian moved closer, and now Liana could see something like hope in her expression. "Not one. Until you." "I don't understand." "You don't want anything from him except to take care of him. You don't fawn or manipulate or scheme. You just care, genuinely, without agenda." Vivian reached out and took Liana's hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "My son has lived in isolation for 8 years, Liana, surrounded by people who fear him or want to use him, but never truly seen. You see him, and whether you realize it or not, he sees you too." Liana's throat was tight. "Mrs. DeLuca, you're the woman my son needs." Vivian squeezed her hand once more before releasing it. "I'm not telling you what to do, dear. I'm just telling you that if something develops between you, you have my blessing. More than that, you have my encouragement." Before Liana could formulate a response, Vivian was gone, leaving behind only the faint scent of her perfume and the sound of Liana's heart hammering against her ribs. That night, Liana lay in her room in the staff quarters, a comfortable suite that she'd personalized with plants and books and the few photographs she had from culinary school, and stared at the ceiling, unable to sleep. Vivian's words played on repeat in her mind. "You see him. He sees you. You have my blessing." It should have felt like permission. Instead, it felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing that one step forward would send her into freefall with no guarantee of where she'd land. She thought about Roman sitting across from her in the kitchen that morning, the way his presence had filled the space like gravity. She thought about all the mornings before, the gradual accumulation of small moments, a nod of appreciation, a rare smile, the way he'd started asking her opinion on wines for dinner, how he'd noticed when she cut her hair and said simply, "It suits you." She'd told herself it meant nothing. Professional courtesy, basic politeness. But what if Vivian was right? What if he felt it too? This pull, this recognition, this dangerous possibility. Liana rolled onto her side and watched the moonlight pattern across her floor. Tomorrow morning would come in a few hours. She'd wake at 5:30 like always. She'd go to the kitchen and start preparing breakfast. Roman would come downstairs and she'd serve him, and the day would unfold according to its established rhythm. Except now, everything had changed. Now she knew that Vivian had noticed, that Roman had talked about her, that the feelings she'd kept locked away might not be as one-sided as she'd believed. Sleep finally came sometime after 3, thin and restless, full of dreams where she reached for something that stayed just out of grasp. The next morning arrived too quickly. Liana moved through her routine on autopilot, preparing the espresso, whisking eggs, slicing fruit. Her hands knew the motions even while her mind spun with exhaustion and anxiety. Roman appeared at 6:15, earlier than usual. He was dressed for a meeting, dark suit, crisp white shirt, no tie yet. He looked tired, and Liana wondered if he'd slept any better than she had. "Morning," he said, and there was something different in his voice, something less guarded. "Good morning." She set his espresso in front of him, and their fingers brushed for half a second. The contact sent electricity up her arm. "Liana." He said her name like he was testing it, feeling the shape of it in his mouth. "Can I ask you something?" Her heart kicked. "Of course." "Why did you take this job?" The question caught her off guard. "I needed work. Your mother offered good pay." "That's not what I'm asking." Roman wrapped both hands around his espresso cup, and Liana noticed the scars across his knuckles, faint white lines that told stories she'd never hear. "You could have worked anywhere, could have gone to a restaurant, built a reputation, done the whole chef thing. Why here? Why this?" She could lie. Give him something safe and professional. But Vivian's words echoed in her mind. "You see him. He sees you." "Because it mattered," Liana said quietly. "Because cooking for one person, paying attention to what they need, taking care of them, that felt important in a way that cooking for 100 strangers wouldn't." Roman was very still. "Just anyone? Or someone specific?" The question hung between them like a blade. Liana set down the whisk she'd been holding and met his eyes directly. "Someone specific." The silence that followed was profound. She watched emotions flicker across Roman's face, surprise, uncertainty, something that might have been hope. "I don't—" He stopped, started again. "I don't do well with people, Liana. I don't trust easily. The business I'm in, the life I lead, it's not compatible with anything soft, anything real." "I know what you do." She kept her voice steady even though her hands were shaking. "I know what you are. It doesn't change anything." "It should." Roman stood abruptly, began pacing the length of the kitchen. "You should be terrified of me. You should want nothing to do with this life, this family, any of it." "But I don't." He stopped pacing and turned to look at her, and the raw vulnerability in his expression nearly broke her heart. "Why?" "Because I see who you are when no one's watching," Liana said. "I see how you treat the staff, how you take care of your mother, how you carry the weight of everything on your shoulders and never complain. I see the man, Roman, not the reputation. The man is the reputation." But his voice lacked conviction. "No." She moved around the island, closing the distance between them, emboldened by exhaustion and emotion and 8 months of suppressed feelings. The man is someone who drinks his espresso with 1 sugar and likes his eggs over medium and misses his grandmother's cooking. The man is someone who reads in his office at night because he can't sleep, who protects everyone in this house like their family, who's forgotten what it feels like to let someone take care of him. Roman stared at her, and she could see him struggling with something internal, some decision that would change everything. "This is insane," he said finally. "You work for me. You're 23 years old. You should be out living your life, not wasting it on what? On you?" She took another step closer. "Roman, I'm not wasting anything. I'm exactly where I want to be. You don't know what you're saying." "Yes, I do." Her voice was steady now, certain. "I've known for months." The admission seemed to shatter his remaining defenses. He closed the last distance between them in 2 strides, one hand coming up to cup her face with surprising gentleness. "If we do this," he said, his voice rough, "there's no going back. My life is complicated and dangerous and nothing like what you deserve. But if you're sure, if you really mean this, I'm sure." Liana leaned into his touch, her hand covering his. "I've never been more sure of anything." For a long moment, they just stood there, breathing the same air, balanced on the edge of everything changing. Then Roman leaned down and kissed her, soft and careful, like she was something precious that might break. Liana kissed him back, pouring 8 months of longing and care and desperate hope into the contact. His free arm came around her waist, pulling her closer, and she felt the tension in his body, the years of control finally cracking. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Roman rested his forehead against hers. "My mother is going to be insufferable about this," he murmured. Liana laughed, the sound shaky but genuine. "She already knows." "Of course she does." Roman pulled back just enough to look at her, his thumb tracing her cheekbone. "She told you, didn't she? Gave you her blessing? Last night. And you still stayed? Where else would I go?" Liana reached up and straightened his collar, a gesture both intimate and domestic that made his expression soften. "This is where I belong." Roman kissed her again, deeper this time, and Liana felt the last of her carefully maintained distance dissolve. This was happening. They were happening. The quiet cook and the Mafia boss, the impossible becoming real. When they heard footsteps approaching, they separated quickly. Vivian appeared in the doorway, took one look at them. Liana flushed and disheveled. Roman with his guard completely down, and smiled. "Well," she said lightly, "it's about time." The next 2 weeks unfolded in a strange new rhythm. Nothing changed outwardly. Liana still prepared meals, still maintained her professional demeanor around the household staff, still kept to her quarters at night. But everything had changed internally. Roman found excuses to linger in the kitchen. Their conversations grew longer, more personal. He told her about taking over the family business after his father's sudden death, about the impossible choices he'd had to make, about the betrayal from someone he'd trusted that had left him suspicious of everyone. She told him about growing up without family, about finding solace in cooking, about the loneliness of always being on the outside looking in at other people's lives. They were careful. Roman's position meant he had enemies who would exploit any weakness, and Liana understood that she'd become a vulnerability the moment they'd acknowledged their feelings. But within the walls of the estate, in stolen moments between obligations, they built something fragile and real. Vivian watched it all with satisfied approval, occasionally manufacturing errands that left them alone together, making comments about how much brighter Roman seemed lately. "You've done what I'd hoped," she told Liana one afternoon while they were reviewing the menu for an upcoming dinner party. "You've reminded him that life isn't just business and strategy, that there's room for softness too." "He's not as hard as he pretends, Van," Liana said quietly. "No." Vivian's expression was fond. He never has been. He just had to be for so long that he forgot how to be anything else. That evening, Roman found Liana in the garden, where she sometimes went after dinner to decompress. She was sitting on a stone bench near the fountain, watching the water catch the last light of sunset. He sat down beside her without a word, close enough that their shoulders touched. They stayed like that for a long time, just existing in each other's presence, until the sky deepened to indigo and stars began appearing overhead. "I have to go to New York next week," Roman said finally. 3 days of meetings. I want you to come with me." Liana turned to look at him, surprised. "As what?" "As yourself." He took her hand, threading their fingers together. "As the woman I—" He stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. "The woman you what?" Roman was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Then, "The woman I'm falling in love with." The words hit her like a physical force. She'd known her own feelings for months, but hearing him say it, admitting to something he probably hadn't let himself feel in years, it was overwhelming. "Roman, you don't have to say anything." He was staring straight ahead, his jaw tight. "I know this is fast. I know this isn't a normal situation, but I need you to know that this isn't casual for me, that you're not casual for me." Liana squeezed his hand. "I love you," she said simply. "I've loved you since the first morning you told me the eggs were perfect." He turned to her then, and the expression on his face, raw and open and almost painfully hopeful, made her chest ache. "Come to New York," he said again. "Let me take you to dinner somewhere besides this estate. Let me show you that I can be more than what I am here. You don't have to prove anything to me. I want to." Roman brought her hand to his lips, kissed her knuckles. "I want to give you everything I should have given you from the beginning. Attention, time, a life that isn't hidden in the margins. I know you don't need it. His voice was fierce. But you deserve it, and I want to be the one who gives it to you. Liana leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. Okay, she whispered. Okay, I'll come to New York. She felt him relax, his arm coming around her waist. They sat like that until the night grew cool and the lights in the house began winking on one by one. Two people who'd found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances, building something that felt impossible and inevitable all at once. Neither of them noticed Vivian watching from the terrace, her expression satisfied, already planning her convenient absence the following weekend. The trip to New York was scheduled for Thursday morning. Liana spent Tuesday night packing a small suitcase, trying on and discarding outfits, wondering what someone wore to dinner with a man like Roman in a city like that. Everything she owned felt inadequate. The simple dresses and cardigans that worked fine for the estate suddenly looked provincial and cheap under her bedroom light. She was holding up a navy dress, frowning at a loose thread near the hem, when someone knocked on her door. Vivian stood in the hallway holding 3 garment bags and wearing an expression that dared Liana to refuse. "We're the same size," she said, sweeping past Liana into the room, "and I haven't worn any of these in years. They're just taking up space in my closet. Mrs. DeLuca, I can't." "You can, and you will." Vivian laid the bags across Liana's bed and unzipped the first one, revealing a sleek black cocktail dress that probably cost more than Liana made in 3 months. "Roman mentioned you are accompanying him to New York. You'll need something appropriate for the restaurants he frequents." Liana touched the fabric, silk, impossibly soft. "This is too much." "Nonsense. These have been sitting unused for years. I'd rather see them worn by someone who'll appreciate them." Vivian unzipped the second bag, showing a deep emerald dress with a draped neckline. "This one would look stunning with your coloring." "Why are you doing this?" Liana asked quietly. Vivian paused, her hand resting on the third garment bag. When she looked at Liana, her expression was unexpectedly vulnerable. "Because I want my son to be happy," she said. "And for the first time in 8 years, I see the possibility of that. You've given him something I couldn't, the ability to trust again, to feel something besides duty and obligation. The least I can do is make sure you have what you need to meet his world on equal footing." Liana's throat tightened. "I'm not sure I'll ever be on equal footing with his world." "Neither was I when I married his father." Vivian smiled, sad and knowing. "I was a school teacher from Connecticut. Vincent was already running the family business. Everyone said it wouldn't work, that I didn't belong, that I'd never survive in this life." She reached out and squeezed Liana's hand. "But here I am 35 years later. You don't need to come from this world, dear. You just need to love someone enough to build a place in it together." After Vivian left, Liana tried on all 3 dresses. The emerald one fit perfectly, making her look like someone who belonged in Roman's world, someone confident and sophisticated instead of a cook who'd grown up in foster care wearing donated clothes. She studied herself in the mirror, barely recognizing the woman looking back. This was really happening. She was really doing this, stepping out of the kitchen and into Roman's life in a way that would make their relationship visible, undeniable. The thought terrified her, but not enough to make her back down. Wednesday afternoon, Roman asked her to meet him in his office after lunch. Liana had only been inside the room a handful of times, always briefly, dropping off coffee or collecting dishes. It was a masculine space, all dark wood and leather, with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and windows overlooking the grounds. The desk was massive, covered in papers and file folders that she carefully didn't look at too closely. Roman was standing by the window when she entered, hands in his pockets, staring out at the garden. He turned when he heard her, and the smile that crossed his face was still new enough to make her pulse jump. "Close the door," he said. She did, suddenly aware they were completely alone in a way they rarely were. Roman crossed to her, one hand coming up to cup her face in a gesture that was becoming familiar, necessary. "I need to tell you something before we leave tomorrow," he said. "About New York. About what you might see." Liana waited, reading tension in his shoulders. "The meetings I have, they're with people who know what I do, who I am. There are rules in this life, protocols. You'll be safe, I promise you that. But you might hear things, see things, that will make you question whether this is what you want. I already know what I want, she said. You know this version. Roman gestured vaguely at the room, the estate beyond. The controlled version. New York is different. It's where I have to be the person everyone expects. Harder. Colder. Less. He stopped, frustrated. Less like the man I am with you. Liana understood what he was trying to say. You think I'll be scared of you. I think you should be. His voice was rough. I think any sane person would be. She stepped closer, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. Roman, I've watched you for 8 months. I've seen you make phone calls that ended with someone crying. I've served you dinner after meetings where you came back with blood on your shirt cuff. I'm not naive about what you do. Knowing and seeing are different things. Maybe. She reached up and loosened his tie, a small intimacy that made his breath catch. But I'm not going to run. Whatever you need to be in New York, whoever you need to be, it doesn't change this. It doesn't change us. Roman pulled her against him, his arms tight around her waist, his face buried in her hair. They stood like that for a long time, neither speaking, just holding on. I don't deserve you, he murmured finally. Good thing I'm not asking what you deserve. Liana pulled back just enough to look at him. I'm choosing what I want. He kissed her then, deep and desperate, and she felt the control he maintained so carefully begin to fracture. His hands moved down her back, pressing her closer, and she responded in kind, her fingers threading through his hair. 7 days of stolen kisses and careful restraint finally giving way to something rawer. Liana. Her name came out like a prayer or a curse. If we don't stop, then don't stop. She was breathing hard, her heart hammering. Roman, I'm not asking you to be careful with me. I'm not fragile. You feel fragile. His hands were shaking slightly where they gripped her waist. You feel like something I could break without meaning to. You won't. She kissed him again, softer this time. I trust you. The words seemed to undo something in him. He lifted her easily, setting her on the edge of his desk, papers scattering. Liana wrapped her legs around his waist, pulling him closer, dimly aware they were crossing a line they'd been dancing around for weeks. A knock on the door made them freeze. Roman? Vivian's voice muffled by the heavy wood. Your 3 o'clock is waiting. Roman dropped his forehead against Liana's shoulder, his breathing ragged. I'll be right there. They heard Vivian's footsteps retreat. Neither of them moved for several seconds. Terrible timing, Liana said, trying for lightness, even though her whole body was still humming with want. Roman laughed, the sound rough and genuine. She has a gift for it. He straightened, helping Liana slide off the desk, his hands lingering at her waist. We should... This probably isn't the place. Probably not. But she didn't move away. He kissed her forehead, gentle in contrast to the intensity of moments before. Tomorrow, after we get to New York. I'll take you to dinner, and then... He didn't finish the sentence, but the promise in his eyes was clear. Liana nodded, not trusting her voice. She straightened his tie, smoothed his collar, small acts of care that felt more intimate than the kissing had been. Then she slipped past him and left the office, aware of his gaze following her every step. That night, she barely slept. Tomorrow everything would change. Tomorrow she'd step into Roman's world fully, publicly. Tomorrow she'd stop being the cook who loved him in secret and become the woman who loved him out loud. The thought was exhilarating and terrifying in equal measure. Thursday morning arrived bright and cold. A car picked them up at 7, sleek and black with windows tinted dark enough that Liana couldn't see out. Roman sat beside her in the back seat, close but not touching, his attention on his phone as he answered emails and texts. Liana watched the estate disappear behind them. Then the familiar roads give way to highway. Then the landscape flatten into industrial stretches she didn't recognize. She'd never been to New York, had barely been outside her home state. The scope of what she was doing, leaving with Roman, going to a city she didn't know, stepping into a life she didn't understand, suddenly felt overwhelming. As if sensing her anxiety, Roman put his phone down and took her hand. Okay? Nervous, she admitted. Me too. That surprised her. You've done this 1,000 times. Not with you. He squeezed her fingers. That makes it different. The drive took 4 hours. They stopped once for coffee, and Liana noticed how Roman's bodyguard, a quiet man named Marcus, who'd been following at a discreet distance, positioned himself between them and the other customers. It was subtle, professional, but it reminded her that Roman lived with a level of threat she'd never had to consider. When they finally crossed into Manhattan, Liana pressed her face to the window, watching buildings climb toward the sky, streets crowded with more people than she'd ever seen in one place. The density of it all was staggering. "First time?" Roman asked, sounding amused. "Is it that obvious?" "You look like I felt the first time I came here." His expression softened with memory. "I was 17. My father brought me to meet with the families that control the boroughs. I'd grown up hearing about New York like it was Olympus, where the real power lived. When I finally saw it, all I could think was that the buildings were too tall and everything moved too fast." "What did your father say?" "That I'd better get used to it, because someday I'd be the one meeting with those families." Roman's voice went flat. "He died 6 months later, car accident, and suddenly I was here, 24 years old, trying to prove I could fill shoes I'd never expected to inherit that young." Liana tightened her grip on his hand. He rarely talked about his father, about taking over the business. She sensed old grief in the careful way he spoke, wounds that hadn't fully healed. The car pulled up in front of a hotel that looked like something from a movie. Marble and glass and doormen in uniforms that probably cost more than her entire wardrobe. Marcus opened the door, and Roman stepped out first, then turned to help Liana. The lobby was enormous, all soaring ceilings and crystal chandeliers. Liana felt immediately out of place despite Vivian's borrowed dress and the effort she'd put into her appearance. Everyone here looked like they belonged, polished, confident, moving through the space like they owned it. Roman checked them in with quiet efficiency, his hand at the small of Liana's back, a possessive gesture that she found oddly comforting. The suite they were shown to was on the top floor, with windows overlooking Central Park, and enough space that Liana's entire apartment back at the estate could have fit in the living room alone. "This is—" She stopped, not sure how to finish. "Excessive? Beautiful? Intimidating? Too much?" Roman was watching her carefully. "I was going to say overwhelming." She moved to the windows, staring out at the park stretched below, the tiny figures of people moving along pathways. "You live like this? When you travel?" "Usually." He came up behind her, his arms circling her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. "Is it a problem?" "No, it's just, I'm realizing how little I actually know about your life, the real scope of it." "Does it bother you?" Liana leaned back against him, feeling the solid warmth of his body, the steady rhythm of his breathing. "Ask me again in a few days." He turned her in his arms, his expression serious. "The meeting tonight is at 7. Dinner with 3 men who control shipping contracts on the East Coast. They're expecting me alone, but I want you there. Are you sure that's a good idea?" "No." Roman's smile was grim, "but I'm tired of keeping you separate from this part of my life. And they need to know that you're under my protection, that anyone who touches you answers to me." The casual mention of violence sent a chill down her spine, but she pushed it aside. This was his world. These were the rules he lived by. "What do I need to do?" "Be yourself. Let me handle the business. If anyone asks, you're—" He paused, seeming to struggle with the phrasing. "Your girlfriend," Liana suggested. Something flickered in Roman's eyes. "Is that what you want to be?" "I think we're a little past casual dating," she said dryly. He laughed, the sound surprised and genuine. "Yeah, I guess we are." He kissed her forehead, then her nose, then finally her mouth, soft and sweet. "Get some rest. Tonight's going to be long." The meeting was held in a private room at a restaurant that didn't have prices on the menu, the kind of place where everything was understated and perfect and cost more than Liana wanted to think about. Roman arrived in a charcoal suit that made him look dangerous and untouchable, and Liana wore the emerald dress Vivian had given her, her hair swept up in a style she'd practiced 3 times before getting right. The 3 men were already seated when they arrived. They stood as Roman entered, and Liana watched the subtle shift in power dynamics, the way they deferred to him even though 2 of them were older, the careful respect that bordered on fear. Gentlemen, Roman's voice was different here, harder. This is Liana Moretti. She's with me. The introduction was brief, possessive. The men nodded politely, their eyes assessing her in a way that made her skin crawl, but none of them questioned her presence. Dinner was an exercise in careful conversation. The men talked about shipping routes and container schedules, using language that sounded legitimate but that Liana suspected concealed something else entirely. Roman listened more than he spoke, occasionally asking pointed questions that seemed to make the other men nervous. Liana stayed quiet, playing the role of decorative companion, but she watched everything. The way the man to Roman's left kept touching his water glass when he lied. The way the oldest one's smile never reached his eyes. The tension that ratcheted up whenever Roman's attention focused on one of them too long. This was the world Roman navigated every day. A world of hidden meanings and unspoken threats, where trust was a liability and weakness got you killed. Halfway through the main course, the youngest of the three men, Angelo, maybe 35 with 2 white teeth and gold rings on 3 fingers, made the mistake of addressing Liana directly. "So, Liana, how'd you meet our friend Roman here?" The table went very quiet. Liana felt Roman tense beside her. "I work for his family," she said evenly. Angelo's smile widened. "Work for him. That's one way to put it." "Angelo." Roman's voice was soft, deadly. "You're going to apologize to her, right now." The man's smile faltered. "Hey, I didn't mean... I don't care what you meant." Roman's hand rested on the table, relaxed, but Liana saw the warning in the gesture. "You disrespected her, apologize." The other 2 men were staring at their plates, carefully not getting involved. Angelo's face had gone red. "I apologize," he said finally, the words tight. "I didn't mean any offense." Roman didn't acknowledge the apology, just turned his attention back to his meal like nothing had happened. But Liana felt the shift in the room, the reminder that Roman wasn't just another businessman at the table. He was the one with real power, and crossing him had consequences. The rest of dinner passed without incident. Business was concluded, hands were shaken, and then Roman was guiding Liana out of the restaurant with his hand at her back, Marcus materializing from wherever he'd been waiting to follow them to the car. They didn't speak until they were back in the hotel suite. Roman poured himself a drink, whiskey, neat, and stood by the windows, his shoulders tight with residual tension. "I'm sorry about Angelo," he said without turning around. "He was out of line." "You didn't have to defend me like that." "Yes, I did." Roman finally looked at her, and his expression was fierce. "You're mine, Liana. That means anyone who disrespects you, diminishes you, treats you like you're anything less than exactly who you are, they answer to me. That's not negotiable." The possessiveness should have bothered her. Instead, it made something warm unfurl in her chest. She crossed to him, took the whiskey glass from his hand, and set it aside. "I'm yours, if you want to be." His voice had gone rough. "If I haven't scared you off yet." "You haven't." She reached up and loosened his tie, the way she'd done in his office 2 days ago. "And yes, I want to be." Roman pulled her against him hard enough to knock the breath from her lungs, his mouth finding hers with an intensity that made her knees weak. This was different from the careful kisses they'd shared before. This was need and claim, and all the restraint he'd been maintaining finally breaking apart. Liana kissed him back with equal fervor, her hands working at the buttons of his shirt, desperate to feel skin against skin. They stumbled toward the bedroom, leaving a trail of discarded clothes, his jacket, her shoes, his tie tangled with her dress strap. When they finally made it to the bed, Roman paused, his hands framing her face, his breathing ragged. "Last chance," he said. "Last chance to tell me this is too fast, too much, too—" Liana silenced him with a kiss. "I don't want slow," she whispered against his mouth. "I don't want careful. I want you. All of you." What little control he had left shattered. He pulled her dress off with shaking hands, his mouth tracing the line of her collarbone, the curve of her breast, the plane of her stomach. Liana arched into him, her fingers digging into his shoulders, lost in sensation and want, and the overwhelming rightness of this moment. When he finally entered her, they both froze, staring at each other in the dim light filtering through the curtains. Then Roman moved, slow and deep, and Liana wrapped her legs around his waist, matching his rhythm, feeling something fundamental shift between them. This wasn't just sex. This was trust and vulnerability, and two people who'd been alone for too long finally finding home in each other. After, they lay tangled together in the sheets, Liana's head on Roman's chest, his fingers trailing idle patterns along her spine. Neither of them spoke, but the silence was comfortable, complete. "I love you," Roman said finally, the words barely audible. "I don't know when it happened. Maybe the first morning you made me cacio e pepe, and I realized you'd been paying attention to me in ways no one else did. Maybe the day you told me you weren't afraid of my world. But I love you, Liana, completely." Tears pricked her eyes. "I love you too. I have for months." "I know." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "I was just too stubborn to let myself see it." They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other. And for the first time since taking over his father's business, Roman slept through the night without waking once. The next 2 days in New York followed a similar pattern. Business meetings during the day, where Liana sat quietly and observed while Roman navigated the complex politics of his world. Dinners at restaurants where people watched them with curiosity and speculation. Nights in the hotel suite where they explored each other with increasing familiarity, learning what made the other gasp or smile or surrender completely. On their last night, Roman took her to a small Italian place in Brooklyn. Nothing fancy, just good food and checked tablecloths and a waiter who called him by name. "My grandmother used to bring me here," he explained as they settled into a corner booth. "Before she died, before everything got complicated. This place is the only thing in New York that still feels like it did back then." Liana looked around at the faded photographs on the walls, the older couples sharing wine, the easy warmth of the space. "Thank you for bringing me here. I wanted you to see this part too, not just the meetings and the performance, the real pieces." They ordered too much food and shared it all, talking about nothing important, books they'd read, places they wanted to travel, stupid things they'd done as kids. It was normal and perfect, and everything Liana had wanted without knowing she could have it. As they were leaving, Roman pulled her into a narrow alley beside the restaurant. The brick walls pressed close on either side, the sounds of the city muffled and distant. "Marry me," he said. Liana's heart stopped. "What? I know it's fast. I know we haven't even been together a month, but I don't care." His hands cupped her face, his thumbs stroking her cheekbones. "I've spent 8 years alone, Liana. 8 years convinced I'd never find anyone who could handle this life, who could see past what I do to who I am. And then you walked into my kitchen and looked at me like I was worth caring about, and everything changed. Roman, I don't need an answer right now, but I need you to know that this isn't temporary for me. That when I think about my future, you're in every version of it. You're the only version of it that makes sense." Liana was crying, tears streaming down her face, her chest so full of emotion she could barely breathe. "Yes." He blinked. "Yes? Yes, I'll marry you. Yes to all of it." She laughed through the tears, giddy and overwhelmed. "You insane, impossible man. Yes." Roman kissed her like she was oxygen and he'd been drowning, his arms tight around her waist, lifting her off her feet. When he finally set her down, they were both laughing, both crying, pressed together in a Brooklyn alley like they were the only two people in the world. "I don't have a ring," he said, sounding almost embarrassed. "I don't care." And she didn't. The ring was just a symbol. This, his hands in her hair, his forehead pressed against hers, his whispered promises in the dark, this was what mattered. They drove back to the estate the next morning, and Liana watched the city disappear behind them with mixed feelings. New York had been a revelation, a glimpse into the full scope of Roman's world, but she was ready to go home, ready to start building their life together in the place where they'd found each other. Vivian was waiting in the foyer when they arrived, and one look at their faces told her everything she needed to know. "Well," she said, her smile radiant, "I suppose congratulations are in order." "How did you—" Liana started. "Please, I know my son." Vivian pulled Liana into a hug, fierce and warm. Welcome to the family, dear. Officially. That evening, the three of them had dinner together in the formal dining room, and Roman announced the engagement with simple directness. Vivian raised her glass in a toast, her eyes bright with unshed tears. To new beginnings, she said, and to love that's strong enough to survive anything. They drank to that, and Liana felt the last piece of her old life, the lonely cook who'd loved in secret, finally slip away, replaced by something she'd never dared hope for, a place to belong, a person to build with, a future that stretched bright and certain ahead. The engagement should have been the beginning of something simple and happy. Instead, it became the thing that nearly destroyed them. The trouble started 3 days after they returned from New York. Liana was in the kitchen preparing lunch when Marcus appeared in the doorway, his expression tight with something she couldn't read. Miss Moretti, Mr. DeLuca needs to see you in his office. Now. The formality in his voice sent ice through her veins. Marcus had been calling her Liana for weeks, ever since Roman made it clear she wasn't just staff anymore. Hearing Miss Moretti meant something was wrong. She found Roman behind his desk, his phone pressed to his ear, his free hand gripping the edge of the mahogany hard enough that his knuckles had gone white. He looked up when she entered, and the expression on his face made her stomach drop. "I'll call you back," he said into the phone, then ended the call and set it down with careful precision. "Close the door." Liana did, her heart hammering. "What's wrong?" "Do you know a man named David Chen?" The name hit her like a fist. She hadn't heard it in over a year, hadn't let herself think about that part of her life since she'd started working for the DeLucas. "I used to. Why?" "Because he's been talking to people about you. About us." Roman's voice was flat, controlled in a way that meant he was holding back fury. "Telling anyone who'll listen that you're using me? That you've got a history of attaching yourself to men with money? That's not—" Liana's throat closed. "Roman, whatever he told you, it's not true." "Then tell me the truth." He stood, came around the desk, but didn't touch her. Kept a careful distance that hurt more than anger would have. "Tell me about David Chen." Liana wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the warmth of the room. "I met him 2 years ago, when I was still in culinary school. He was older, successful, and he paid attention to me in a way no one else ever had. I was 21 and stupid, and I thought—" She stopped, swallowed hard. "I thought he loved me." "What happened?" "He lied about everything. Said he was divorced, that he wanted to help me with school, that we'd build a life together. Turned out he was still married, had been the whole time. His wife showed up at my apartment one night and told me exactly what kind of man I'd been sleeping with. The memory still burned, the shame of it. I ended it immediately, blocked his number, moved to a different apartment, made sure I never saw him again." Roman's jaw was tight. "He says you stole from him." "What?" The accusation was so unexpected that Liana actually laughed, the sound harsh. "I never took anything from him. I paid my own tuition, worked 2 jobs to cover rent. The only thing he ever gave me was a necklace for my birthday, and I left it on his doorstep the day I found out he was married. He claims you took $20,000 from his safe. That's insane. I didn't even know he had a safe, much less the combination." Liana moved toward Roman, desperate to make him understand. "He's lying, Roman. I don't know why, but he's lying." "Why now?" Roman's eyes were hard, searching. "Why come forward now after all this time? Because someone must have told him about us. About you." The realization made her feel sick. "He's doing this to hurt me. Or to—" She stopped as another, worse thought occurred to her. Or someone paid him to do it. Roman went very still. "What do you mean?" "You have enemies, right? People who'd want to make you look weak or distract you or cause problems." Liana's mind was racing now. What better way than to make you doubt the woman you just proposed to? To plant the idea that I'm a gold digger, that I've done this before, that you can't trust me? She watched Roman process this, saw the moment the possibility took hold. His expression shifted from anger to something colder, more calculating. "Tell me everyone you told about the engagement," he said. "Everyone who knew before the announcement. Just Vivienne, and Marcus drove us to New York, so he probably guessed. Liana's hands were shaking. But Roman, even if someone is using David to get to you, it doesn't change the fact that I lied by omission. I should have told you about him, about that whole mess. Why didn't you? Because I was ashamed. The admission came out raw. Because I was 21 and desperate to be loved, and I let myself be used by a man who saw me as something disposable. Because every time I think about it, I feel stupid and small, and I didn't want you to see me that way. Roman's expression softened slightly. He reached for her finally, his hands gripping her shoulders. I need you to be honest with me, Liana. Completely honest. Is there anything else? Anything else in your past that someone could use against you? Against us? She shook her head. No, I swear, he was a mistake, a painful one, but there's nothing else. Okay. Roman pulled her against him, his arms tight around her. Okay, I believe you. Relief made her knees weak. She sagged into him, pressing her face against his chest. What do we do? I make some calls, find out who's behind this, and make sure it doesn't happen again. His voice had gone cold again, the warmth reserved for her dropping away. And you stay here, inside the estate, until I know it's safe. Roman, this isn't a request. He pulled back to look at her, and his eyes were fierce. If someone's targeting you to get to me, they won't stop with rumors. They'll escalate. I need to know you're protected. The next week was the longest of Liana's life. She stayed inside like Roman ordered, watching from the windows as he left for meetings that stretched late into the night. Vivian tried to keep her occupied with wedding planning, but Liana couldn't focus on flowers and guest lists when she could see the strain in Roman's face every time he came home. He was pulling away from her. Not physically, he still held her at night, still kissed her goodbye in the mornings, but emotionally. She could feel him rebuilding the walls he'd started to tear down, protecting himself against the possibility that she might not be who he thought she was. On the 8th day, she found him in his office at 2 a.m, staring at his computer screen with bloodshot eyes. You need to sleep, she said from the doorway. I need to find out who's doing this. He didn't look up. I've got people looking into Chen's finances, his phone records, everyone he's been in contact with for the past 6 months. Someone paid him, Liana. I just need to prove it. She moved into the room, came around behind his chair, and started massaging his shoulders. The muscles were knotted with tension. What if you don't find proof? What if whoever's behind this covered their tracks? Then Chen disappears, and the rumors die anyway. Roman's voice was matter-of-fact, like he was discussing the weather instead of making someone vanish. Liana's hands stilled. You do that? For me? I'd do worse. He finally turned to look at her, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. You're mine, Liana. That means I protect you, no matter what it takes. The possessiveness should have scared her. Instead, it made her feel safer than she ever had in her life. Come to bed, she said quietly. Whatever you're going to find, you'll find it better after you've slept. For a moment she thought he'd refuse. Then he stood, shutting down the computer, and let her lead him upstairs to their room. They'd been sleeping together since New York, Roman's suite becoming theirs in a gradual shift that no one commented on, but everyone noticed. In bed, Liana curled against him, her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat gradually slow as exhaustion finally won. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm sorry my past is causing problems for you. Everyone has a past. Roman's fingers traced patterns on her spine. I just hate that yours is being used as a weapon. Do you ever regret it? Choosing me? Never. The answer was immediate, certain. You're the best decision I've made in 8 years, Liana. The only decision that's felt right. She tilted her head up to kiss him, soft and slow, trying to communicate everything she couldn't put into words. He responded with matching gentleness, his hand cupping her face, and for a few minutes the outside world ceased to exist. But reality came crashing back the next morning when Marcus burst into the kitchen while Liana was making breakfast. They found him, he said, breathless. Chen, he's dead. Liana's hands went numb. The knife she'd been using to slice fruit clattered against the cutting board. What? Overdose, his apartment, Police are calling it accidental, but Marcus glanced toward the hallway, checking they were alone. Miss Moretti, Mr. DeLuca was in meetings all night. Witnesses, cameras, everything. But you need to know there are going to be questions. I didn't. Roman wouldn't, but even as she said it, doubt crept in. Would he? Would Roman have someone killed to protect her, to stop the rumors? She found him in his office 10 minutes later, still on the phone, his expression unreadable. He ended the call when he saw her face. You heard. Did you do it? The question came out harder than she intended. Did you have him killed? Roman stood, came around the desk. No. But you would have. She could see the truth of it in his eyes. If it had come to that, you would have. Yes. No hesitation, no apology. I would have done whatever was necessary to protect you. That's who I am, Liana. That's what this life means. She should have been horrified, should have been running for the door, calling the police, putting distance between herself and a man who could discuss murder like it was a business decision. Instead, she grabbed his face and kissed him hard, desperate, needing to feel something real beneath the fear. I love you, she said when they broke apart. I love you, and it terrifies me how much I'm willing to accept to keep you. Then we're even. Roman's smile was grim. Because you terrify me too. The idea of losing you, of something happening to you, it's the only thing I'm actually afraid of anymore. 2 days later, Roman's investigator delivered his report. David Chen had been contacted 6 weeks earlier by an intermediary, offered $50,000 to spread rumors about Liana. The money had come through 3 shell companies, but the investigator had tracked it back to its source, Angelo Russo, the man who'd insulted Liana at dinner in New York. He's been trying to undermine me for 2 years, Roman explained, showing Liana the documentation spread across his desk. Thinks he should have control of the East Coast shipping contracts. When I shut him down at that dinner, humiliated him in front of the others, he decided to hit me where I was vulnerable. Me, Liana said quietly. You. Roman's jaw was tight. He hired Chen, paid him to make you look like a con artist. When Chen got greedy and tried to blackmail Angelo for more money, Angelo had him killed to tie up loose ends. How do you know all this? Because I have people inside Angelo's organization, have had for months. Roman gathered the papers and fed them into his shredder. And because Angelo's second-in-command doesn't particularly like his boss, for the right price, he was very forthcoming. Liana watched the documents turn to confetti. What happens now? Now I handle Angelo, permanently. The word made her stomach clench. You mean you're going to... I'm going to make sure he never threatens what's mine again. Roman's voice was cold, final. This is what my world looks like, Liana. This is what happens when someone crosses lines they shouldn't cross. If you can't handle that, tell me now. She thought about it. Really thought about it. About the violence implicit in everything Roman did, the blood on the money that paid for this estate and the life they were building. About the fact that loving him meant accepting all of it, the gentleness he showed her and the ruthlessness he showed everyone else. I can handle it, she said finally, but I need you to promise me something. Anything. Promise me you'll never lie to me about what you do. I don't need details, but I need honesty. I need to know that when you come home with blood on your hands, you'll tell me the truth about whose blood it is. Roman stared at her for a long moment. Then he crossed to her, pulled her into his arms, and held her so tightly she could barely breathe. I promise, he whispered against her hair. No lies. Not ever. Angelo Russo disappeared 3 days later. The official story was that he'd fled to South America after embezzling from his own organization. The unofficial story, the one whispered in the circles that mattered, was that Roman DeLuca had sent a message, and that message had been received loud and clear. No one touched what belonged to Roman. Not his business, not his family, not Liana. The week after Angelo's disappearance, Vivienne insisted they go ahead with announcing the engagement publicly. She threw a party at the estate, inviting everyone who mattered in their world and a few from outside it, politicians, business owners, people whose presence provided a veneer of legitimacy to the wealth built on less legal foundations. Liana wore a white dress that Vivienne had commissioned specially, simple and elegant, with a neckline that showed off the engagement ring Roman had given her the day after Angelo was dealt with. It was a square-cut diamond, 4 carats, set in platinum, with smaller stones circling it. Beautiful and understated, and probably worth more than everything Liana had owned in her entire life before meeting the DeLucas. She stood beside Roman in the ballroom, his hand at her waist, and accepted congratulations from people she didn't know and would likely never see again. They all said the same things: how beautiful she was, how lucky Roman was, how happy they seemed together. What they meant was, how did a nobody from nowhere land the most eligible bachelor in their world? And more importantly, how long until she screws it up? Liana could see the speculation in their eyes, the judgment. She was too young, too inexperienced, too ordinary for someone like Roman. They were waiting for her to fail, to prove that she didn't belong. "Stop reading their minds," Roman murmured in her ear. "You'll just make yourself angry." "I can't help it. They're all thinking the same thing. They're thinking that I'm a lucky bastard." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "And they're right." Midway through the evening, a woman approached them. She was probably 40, beautiful in a sharp, maintained way, wearing a dress that cost more than a car and jewelry that could fund a small country. "Roman, darling." She air-kissed both his cheeks. "It's been too long." "Gabriella." Roman's voice was polite but cool. "This is my fiancée, Liana Moretti. Liana Gabriella Marino. Her family controls the wine import business." Gabriella turned her assessing gaze on Liana. "How lovely. And how did you two meet?" "Liana works for my mother," Roman said before Liana could answer. "She's a chef." "How?" Charming." Gabriella's smile didn't reach her eyes. "I'm sure you make wonderful meals." The condescension was subtle, but unmistakable. Liana felt Roman tense beside her, but she spoke before he could. "I do my best, though I'm sure the wine pairings you import make any meal better." She smiled sweetly. "Roman particularly enjoyed the Barolo you sent last month. Said it was almost as good as the bottle he got directly from the vineyard in Piedmont." It was a small dig, barely noticeable, but Gabriella's smile froze. The implication was clear. Roman had connections that went around her business, that he didn't need her to access the best wines. "Well," Gabriella said after a moment, "I can see why Roman is smitten. Congratulations to you both." She moved away, her smile tight. Roman waited until she was out of earshot before laughing quietly. "That was well done. She was rude. I'm allowed to be rude back. You're allowed to do whatever you want." He pulled her closer. "You're going to be my wife. That means you outrank half the people in this room, and the other half needs to stay on our good side." The reminder of her new position was still surreal. Liana had spent her whole life being invisible, insignificant, easily dismissed. The idea that she now had power, real social and financial power, was hard to process. Later, when most of the guests had left and only close associates remained, Vivian found Liana on the terrace, taking a break from the noise and performance. "You handled yourself beautifully tonight," Vivian said, joining her at the railing. "I was particularly impressed with how you dealt with Gabriella. She's been trying to sink her claws into Roman for years. I got the impression she wasn't thrilled about the engagement. She's furious, but that's her problem, not yours." Vivian turned to look at her. "How are you really doing with all of this?" Liana considered the question. "Honestly, I'm terrified most of the time. Terrified I'll say the wrong thing, wear the wrong dress, embarrass Roman in front of people who matter. Terrified that one day he'll wake up and realize he could have chosen someone from his world instead of a cook from nowhere. You know what I see when I look at you and my son?" Vivian's voice was gentle. "I see him smile. Really smile, not the performance he gives everyone else. I see him relaxed in a way he hasn't been since his father died. I see him talking about the future like it's something to look forward to instead of something to survive. He does that for me too, makes me feel like I matter. You do matter, to him, to me, to this family." Vivian took Liana's hand. "I know this world is overwhelming. I know it's not what you imagined for yourself, but you're exactly what Roman needs, Liana. And I think, deep down, he's exactly what you need too." Through the French doors, Liana could see Roman talking with a group of men, his posture relaxed but his eyes constantly scanning the room. As if sensing her gaze, he looked up, found her on the terrace, and smiled. That real smile Vivian had mentioned, the one that was just for her. "Yeah," Liana said quietly. "I think you're right." The guests finally left after midnight. Liana kicked off her heels in the foyer, groaning in relief as her feet hit the cool marble. "Remind me never to wear shoes like that again," she said. "I'll remind you right before the wedding, and you'll ignore me and wear them anyway." Roman pulled her into his arms, swaying slightly like they were still dancing even though the music had stopped. "You were perfect tonight." "I was terrified." "I know, but you didn't let it show." He kissed her forehead. "I'm proud of you." The words hit harder than she expected. No one had ever been proud of her before. Foster parents who'd seen her as a meal ticket. Teachers who'd written her off as another kid from a broken home. David, who'd kept her like a secret and discarded her just as easily. But Roman looked at her like she'd accomplished something remarkable just by standing beside him and not running away. "Take me to bed," she whispered. "I want to forget about all those people and just be us." He did, carrying her up the stairs despite her protests, both of them laughing like teenagers instead of adults engaged in a relationship built on trust earned through trauma and violence. In their room, Roman undressed her slowly, reverently, his hands gentle on her skin. They made love with the kind of intensity that came from surviving something difficult together, from choosing each other even when it would have been easier to walk away. After, Liana lay with her head on Roman's chest, tracing the scars she'd found on his body. The bullet wound on his shoulder from a deal gone wrong 5 years ago. The knife scar along his ribs from even earlier. The small marks that told the story of a violent life she was only beginning to understand. "Do you ever want out?" she asked. "Out of this life, this business, all of it?" Roman was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. "Sometimes," he admitted finally. "When I'm with you, when things feel normal and easy, yeah, I imagine what it would be like to walk away, move somewhere quiet, do something that doesn't require armed guards and lawyers on speed dial." "Why don't you?" "Because it's not that simple. The business is tied to too many people, too many families who depend on the structure I maintain. If I walked away, there'd be a power vacuum, wars over territory, people would die." He shifted so he could see her face. "And because I'm good at it, at managing the chaos, maintaining the balance. I don't know who I'd be without it." "You'd be you," Liana said. "The man who likes his eggs over medium and reads late at night and remembers his grandmother's cooking. That person exists separate from the business." "Maybe." Roman didn't sound convinced. "Or maybe that person only exists because you see him, because you look at me and see something besides the role I play." "Then I'll keep looking." She kissed the scar on his shoulder. "For as long as you need me to." They fell asleep tangled together, and Liana dreamed of a future where they were just two people in love, uncomplicated by power and violence and the weight of empires built on blood. She woke sometime in the night to find Roman's side of the bed empty. Liana lay there for a moment, listening to the house settle around her, then got up and pulled on one of his shirts before going to look for him. She found him in his office, as she'd expected, but he wasn't working. He was standing at the window with a glass of whiskey, staring out at the dark grounds with an expression she couldn't read. "Can't sleep?" she asked from the doorway. He turned, and even in the dim light she could see the tension in his shoulders. "Did I wake you?" "No, just noticed you were gone." She moved into the room, came to stand beside him. "What's wrong?" Roman took a long drink before answering. "I got a call, about an hour ago, from someone I used to work with back when my father was still alive." Liana waited, sensing this was important. "His name is Victor Castellano. He ran operations in Chicago for 20 years, retired 5 years ago and moved to Florida. Smart man, careful, the kind of person who knows when to get out." Roman's grip on the glass tightened. "His daughter was killed tonight, shot in her own home while her husband and kids were asleep upstairs." "Oh my God." Liana's hand went to her mouth. "Why?" Because Victor testified against someone 3 years ago. Someone who just got out of prison and decided revenge was worth more than self-preservation. Roman finally looked at her, and his eyes were haunted. Victor did everything right. He got out clean, moved his family somewhere safe, thought the past couldn't touch them anymore. And it didn't matter. His daughter still died because of choices he made decades ago. Liana understood what he wasn't saying. You're thinking about us, about what could happen to me, to any children we might have, because of the life you've lived. I'm thinking that I'm selfish. His voice was rough. That I saw you and wanted you and took you without really considering what that means for your future, your safety, the target I've painted on your back just by loving you. Roman, you should leave. The words came out flat, final. While you still can. Before we get married, before we're tied together legally and everyone knows you're mine, you should take the money I'll give you, go somewhere far away, and build a life that doesn't include armed guards and the constant threat of violence. Liana stared at him, feeling like the ground had dropped out from under her feet. You don't mean that. I do. But he wouldn't meet her eyes. I've been lying to myself, telling myself I could keep you safe, that loving me wouldn't destroy you eventually. Tonight reminded me that's not how this works. The violence finds you anyway, always. She should have been hurt, should have been angry at him for making this decision without her, for deciding what was best like she didn't get a say. Instead, she saw through it, saw the fear underneath the control, the love underneath the pushing away. No, she said simply. Roman's head snapped toward her. What? No, I'm not leaving. You don't get to make that choice for me. Liana moved closer, took the whiskey glass from his hand and set it aside. I know what I signed up for, Roman. I'm not naive. I know loving you means living with danger, but I also know that living without you would be worse. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. Her voice was steady, certain. You're scared. Someone you cared about lost someone they loved, and now you're trying to protect me by pushing me away. But that's not how this works. That's not how we work. Liana, I'm trying to keep you alive. And I'm trying to live. She grabbed his face, forcing him to look at her. Really live, not just survive. And I can't do that without you, so no, I'm not leaving. You're stuck with me. For a long moment, they just stared at each other, the tension thick enough to cut. Then Roman broke, pulling her against him so hard it hurt, his face buried in her hair. I can't lose you, he whispered. I can't. It would break me. Then don't push me away. Liana held him just as tightly. Whatever happens, we face it together. That's what this means. That's what we promised each other. They stood like that until the whiskey glass sweated a ring onto the desk, and the first hints of dawn started graying the sky. Then Roman took her hand and led her back to bed, and they held each other until the alarm went off and the day demanded they put on their public faces again. But something had shifted between them. Some final wall had come down, and in its place was a rawness that felt both terrifying and necessary. The wedding planning continued over the next few weeks. Vivian hired a coordinator who descended on the estate with fabric swatches and flower samples, and a determination to create the perfect event. Liana went along with most of it, not caring much about centerpieces or invitation fonts, focused instead on the fact that at the end of all this planning, she'd be Roman's wife. She did put her foot down about the guest list, though. The coordinator wanted 300 people. Liana wanted 50. This is supposed to be about us, she argued during one particularly contentious planning session. Not a business networking event disguised as a wedding. Vivian, to her credit, backed her up. Liana's right. This should be intimate, family and close friends only. The coordinator looked scandalized. But Mrs. DeLuca, Mr. DeLuca's position requires certain considerations. There are people who will expect invitations, people who might be offended if they're excluded. Then they'll be offended. Roman walked into the room, having caught the tail end of the conversation. My fiancé wants a small wedding. That's what she'll get. The coordinator opened her mouth to argue, caught the expression on Roman's face, and wisely shut it again. Of course, whatever you prefer. After she left, Liana turned to Roman with raised eyebrows. That was a bit harsh. She was trying to turn our wedding into a political statement. I'm not interested. He pulled Liana into his arms, kissing her forehead. Besides, you're right. This is about us. Everything else is just noise. The wedding was set for the first Saturday in October, 6 months after that morning in the kitchen when everything had changed. They'd have the ceremony in the estate's garden, with dinner and dancing in the ballroom afterward. Simple, elegant, exactly what Liana wanted. 3 weeks before the wedding, Liana realized her period was late. She didn't mention it at first, telling herself it was just stress, that planning a wedding and adjusting to her new life had thrown her cycle off. But when another week passed and she started feeling nauseous in the mornings, she couldn't ignore it anymore. She bought a pregnancy test during a rare trip into town, sneaking it into the estate like contraband, waiting until Roman was in a meeting before locking herself in their bathroom and taking it. The 2 pink lines appeared almost immediately. Liana sat on the edge of the bathtub staring at the test, her mind blank with shock. Pregnant. She was pregnant. They'd been careful most of the time, but not always, and apparently once had been enough. She didn't know how long she sat there before she heard Roman calling her name. She shoved the test into her pocket and opened the door to find him standing in the bedroom, his expression concerned. "You okay? You've been in there a while." "Fine. Just felt a little sick." Not a lie. Exactly. Roman's frown deepened. "You've been sick a lot lately. Maybe you should see a doctor." "Maybe." Liana forced a smile. "I'm sure it's nothing." But it wasn't nothing, and she needed to tell him. Soon. Just not right now, when she was still trying to process it herself. That night, she lay awake beside him, one hand resting on her still flat stomach, trying to imagine what came next. A baby. Their baby. The thought was overwhelming and wonderful and terrifying all at once. She'd grown up without family, bouncing between foster homes that ranged from indifferent to actively hostile. She'd never had a model for what good parenting looked like, had no framework for how to be a mother. And Roman had grown up in this world of violence and control. What kind of father would he be? But even as the doubt circled, she felt something else underneath. Hope. The possibility of creating something good, something whole, something that wasn't marked by the loneliness and loss that had defined both their childhoods. She must have made some sound because Roman stirred beside her, his arm tightening around her waist. "Can't sleep?" "Just thinking." "About what?" His voice was rough with drowsiness. Liana almost told him then, almost rolled over and said the words that would change everything. But she held back, wanting to be sure, wanting to choose the right moment. "About the wedding," she said instead, "about how different my life is now compared to a year ago." Roman pulled her closer, his hand splaying across her stomach in a gesture that made her breath catch. "Good different or scary different?" "Both." She covered his hand with hers. "Definitely both." He kissed her shoulder, already drifting back to sleep, and Liana closed her eyes and tried to imagine the conversation she'd have to have soon. How do you tell someone that you're creating a life together in the most literal sense? How do you explain that the family they'd been building was about to expand in a way neither of them had planned? The next morning, Liana made an appointment with a doctor. Not the family physician the DeLucas used. She wanted privacy, wanted to confirm everything before she said anything to Roman or Vivian. The doctor's office was in a small clinic 20 minutes from the estate, and she told everyone she was running errands. The confirmation came quickly. 6 weeks pregnant, healthy, everything progressing normally. The doctor gave her pamphlets about prenatal care and nutrition, congratulated her warmly, and sent her on her way with instructions to schedule a follow-up in 4 weeks. Liana sat in her car in the parking lot, staring at the ultrasound photo the doctor had given her. It didn't look like much yet, just a blur of black and white with a tiny flicker that was supposedly a heartbeat. But it was real. This was real. She needed to tell Roman, tonight. She found him that evening in the library, reviewing contracts, his reading glasses perched on his nose in a way that made him look younger, almost vulnerable. He looked up when she entered, his expression softening. "Hey, how were the errands?" "Fine." Liana closed the door behind her, suddenly nervous. "Can we talk?" "Of course." He set aside the papers immediately, giving her his full attention. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. She took a breath, trying to find the right words. I have something to tell you, and I don't know how you're going to react, but I need you to just listen until I'm done, okay? Roman's expression went serious. You're scaring me. Don't be scared. It's not bad. At least I don't think it's bad. It's just unexpected. Liana pulled the ultrasound photo from her purse and handed it to him. I'm pregnant. The silence that followed was absolute. Roman stared at the photo, his expression completely blank, and Liana's heart started hammering with anxiety. Say something, she whispered. Roman's voice came out rough. You're sure? Saw a doctor this morning. 6 weeks. Everything's healthy. He was still staring at the ultrasound like he couldn't quite process what he was seeing. Liana's anxiety ratcheted higher. If this isn't what you want, if it's too fast, I understand. There are options, and I wouldn't ask you to. Stop. Roman finally looked up, and his eyes were bright with tears. Just stop talking for a second. Liana froze, watching him struggle with emotions she couldn't name. I never thought I'd have this, he said finally. A family. Someone who loved me enough to build something real with me. And now you're telling me we're going to have a child? His voice cracked. How am I supposed to react to that, Liana? How am I supposed to process that you've given me everything I never let myself want? Relief flooded through her so intensely her knees went weak. So you're happy? Happy! Roman stood, crossed to her, pulled her into his arms. I'm terrified and overwhelmed and completely unprepared. But yeah, I'm happy. More than happy. He kissed her then, deep and thorough, and Liana felt the last of her anxiety dissolve. This was going to be okay. They were going to be okay. When they finally broke apart, Roman kept one hand on her stomach, his expression awed. There's really a baby in there? Apparently. Liana covered his hand with hers. Due in late May, assuming everything continues normally. We're getting married in 3 weeks. You'll be showing by then? Probably not much, maybe a little. She paused. Do you want to wait? Push back the wedding until after? No. The answer was immediate. No, I want you to be my wife before our child is born. I want everything legal and official and permanent. Okay. Liana leaned into him, feeling safe and loved and cautiously optimistic about the future. We should probably tell your mother. Roman groaned. She's going to be insufferable about this. She's going to be thrilled. That's what I said. They told Vivian that night at dinner. Roman had planned to work up to it gradually, but Liana just blurted it out between the salad and main course. I'm pregnant. Vivian's fork clattered against her plate. She stared at Liana, then at Roman, then back at Liana. You're 6 weeks, due in May. For a moment, Vivian just sat there, her hand pressed to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Then she was up and around the table, pulling Liana into a fierce hug. Oh, my dear girl. Oh, I'm so happy for you both. She pulled back, wiping her eyes, then turned to Roman and hugged him just as tightly. A grandchild. I'm going to be a grandmother. Don't start buying things, Roman warned, but he was smiling. We just found out today. I'm buying everything. Vivian was already pulling out her phone. We'll need to convert the room next to yours into a nursery and hire a nanny, though of course I'll be very involved. And we should tell the staff they'll need to adjust meal plans to accommodate Mom. Roman's voice was gentle but firm. Breathe. We have time. Vivian looked at him, then laughed, the sound watery but genuine. You're right. I'm sorry. This is wonderful news. The best news. Dinner became a celebration, with Vivian asking 1,000 questions about due dates and doctor appointments and whether Liana had any cravings yet. Roman watched them both with an expression of contentment that Liana had never seen before, and she realized that this family they were building, was healing something in him that had been broken for a long time. Later that night, in bed, Roman couldn't seem to stop touching her stomach, his hand resting there like he was trying to feel something that was still too small to detect. I'm going to be a terrible father, he said suddenly. Liana turned to look at him. Why would you say that? Because I don't know how to do this. How to be gentle and patient and all the things a kid needs. My father, he loved me, I think, but he was grooming me to take over the business from the time I could walk. Every lesson was about power and control and never showing weakness. That's not what I want for our child. Then don't do that. Liana took his hand, squeezed it. You're not your father, Roman. You get to choose what kind of parent you want to be. What if I screw it up? Then we'll screw it up together. She smiled at his expression. I don't know what I'm doing either. I grew up in foster care, remember? My model for parenting is, don't be like the people who raised me. That's not exactly a comprehensive guide. Roman pulled her closer, his lips brushing her forehead. We're going to figure this out. Yeah, Liana agreed. We are. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of final wedding preparations and Liana trying not to throw up during menu tastings. The morning sickness was worse than she'd expected, and she developed an aversion to coffee that made her morning routine significantly more difficult. Roman was attentive to the point of being overbearing, constantly asking if she needed anything, if she was feeling okay, if she should be resting more. Liana found it endearing and irritating in equal measure. I'm pregnant, not dying, she told him one morning when he tried to carry her breakfast tray upstairs because he didn't think she should be on her feet. I know. I just want to take care of you. You are taking care of me. But you also need to let me live my life. She took the tray from him. I promise I'll tell you if I need help, okay? He looked like he wanted to argue, but nodded instead. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm just worried. I know. Liana kissed him. But we're okay, both of us. The day before the wedding, Liana's morning sickness was so bad she couldn't get out of bed. Roman found her in the bathroom, pale and shaking, and immediately called the doctor despite her protests. It's normal, she tried to tell him. The pamphlet said, I don't care what the pamphlet said. You can barely stand. He was already on the phone, his voice tight with worry. The doctor came to the estate, examined her, and confirmed it was just severe morning sickness, nothing dangerous. She gave Liana some medication to help with the nausea and strict instructions to rest and stay hydrated. Is she going to be okay for tomorrow? Roman asked, and Liana could hear the fear underneath the question. He was worried she wouldn't be able to go through with the wedding. She should be fine by tomorrow evening, the doctor assured him. The medication works quickly. Just make sure she rests today. After the doctor left, Roman sat on the edge of the bed, holding Liana's hand, his expression haunted. We can postpone, he said quietly. If you're not feeling well, we can push the wedding back a few weeks. No. Liana's voice was weak but certain. I want to marry you tomorrow, Roman. I've been waiting for this, and I'm not letting morning sickness stop us. Liana, I'll be fine. The doctor said so. And even if I'm not completely better, I can stand up for 20 minutes and say vows. She squeezed his hand. I'm marrying you tomorrow. That's not changing. He studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Okay, but if you feel worse, if anything happens, you tell me immediately. I promise. Roman stayed with her the rest of the day, ignoring the tradition about not seeing the bride before the wedding, refusing to leave her side even when Vivian tried to drag him away to handle last-minute details. They lay in bed together, Roman's hand on her stomach, talking about the future in a way they'd been too cautious to before. I want to step back from the business, Roman said at one point. Not completely, but enough that I'm actually present. I don't want to be the father who's always in meetings, always dealing with crises, never around. Your father was like that? Yeah. He loved me, but the business always came first. I understood it, even respected it, but I also... He stopped, struggling with the words. I also wish sometimes that I mattered more than the empire he was building. Liana turned to face him. You're going to be a good father, Roman. I know you are, because you're already thinking about this stuff, already planning how to do it better. I hope you're right. I am. She kissed him softly. Now let me sleep. I need to be beautiful for you tomorrow. You're always beautiful. But he settled beside her, pulling her against him, and they slept tangled together while the house bustled with preparations around them. The next day dawned clear and cool, perfect October weather. Liana woke feeling significantly better, the medication having worked as promised. She ate a light breakfast, kept it down, and allowed herself to believe that maybe today would go smoothly after all. Vivian came to help her get ready, bringing the dress they'd chosen, simple white silk that skimmed her body without being tight, elegant without being fussy. It fit perfectly, and when Liana looked at herself in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. "You look perfect," Vivian said, her eyes bright with tears. "Roman's going to lose his mind when he sees you." "I hope so." Liana touched the small bump that was just starting to show if you knew to look for it. "I still can't believe this is happening." "Believe it, dear. You're about to marry my son and give me a grandchild. This is the happiest I've been in years." The ceremony was held at 5 in the afternoon with the setting sun casting golden light across the garden. 50 people filled the chairs arranged on the lawn, and at the front, beneath an arch woven with white roses, stood Roman in a dark suit that made him look impossibly handsome. When Liana walked down the aisle on Vivian's arm, she had no family to give her away, and Vivian had insisted on doing the honors. She watched Roman's expression transform from nervous anticipation to something that looked like awe. She reached him, took his hands, and saw that his eyes were wet. "Hi?" she whispered. "Hi." His voice was rough. "You're stunning." The ceremony itself was brief. They'd written their own vows, kept them simple and honest. "I promise to see you," Liana said, her voice steady despite the tears threatening. "All of you, the powerful man everyone else knows, and the gentle one only I get to see. I promise to stand beside you through everything, to build a life with you that's worth all the fear it took to get here. I promise to love you for exactly who you are, not who you think you should be." Roman's hands tightened on hers. When it was his turn, his voice cracked on the first words. "I promise to protect you, but not so much that I take away your strength. To trust you, even when trusting doesn't come easy. To be the man you see when you look at me, the one who's worthy of the love you've given me." He paused, swallowed hard. "I promise to be the father our child deserves, the husband you deserve, and to spend every day trying to earn what you've already given me freely." When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Roman pulled Liana into a kiss that was tender and fierce and full of promise. The guests erupted in applause, but Liana barely heard it over the sound of her own heartbeat. She was married to Roman DeLuca. The impossible had become real, and the future stretched ahead of them bright and terrifying and completely unknown. The reception was everything they'd wanted, intimate, joyful, full of people who actually cared about them rather than business connections and political obligations. They danced until Liana's feet hurt, ate food she'd helped plan with the new cook Vivian had hired, and laughed more than either of them had in months. Late in the evening, Roman pulled her aside onto a quiet terrace, away from the music and celebration. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For taking a chance on me. For seeing something worth loving in a life that's mostly violence and control. For giving me a family when I'd convinced myself I didn't deserve one." He cupped her face in his hands. "For everything, Liana. Just everything." She kissed him, tasting salt from tears she didn't remember crying. "You don't have to thank me for loving you, Roman. It's the easiest thing I've ever done." They stood there as the stars came out above them, two people who'd found each other against impossible odds, holding on to the fragile, precious thing they'd built together. The honeymoon never happened. 2 days after the wedding, Roman got a call that sent him into his office for 6 hours straight, emerging pale and tense with news that one of his closest associates had been arrested in a federal sting operation. The man was facing 20 years and had already started talking about making deals. "How bad is it?" Liana asked, watching Roman pour his third whiskey of the night. "Bad enough that I need to be visible, need to handle this personally before everything falls apart." He downed the drink in one swallow. "I'm sorry. I know we were supposed to go to Italy. Italy can wait." Liana took the glass from him before he could pour another. "What do you need?" "I need to go to Chicago, meet with people who are going to be asking questions I don't have good answers for. Convince them that this doesn't compromise our entire operation." He scrubbed a hand over his face. "And I need you to stay here, where you're safe." Roman, please. He pulled her against him, his arms tight around her waist. I can't do what needs to be done if I'm worried about you. Just stay here with my mother, let Marcus handle security, and I'll be back as soon as I can. Liana wanted to argue, but she could see the fear underneath his control. So she nodded and kissed him, and watched him leave the next morning with a sick feeling in her stomach that had nothing to do with pregnancy. He was gone for 5 days. 5 days of terse phone calls and text messages that said he was fine but gave no details. 5 days of Liana pacing the estate, trying to distract herself with nursery planning and failing miserably. 5 days of Vivian watching her with concerned eyes and not saying the thing they were both thinking. That Roman's world was dangerous in ways they couldn't control, and someday he might not come home. When he finally walked through the door on the 6th day, Liana was in the kitchen making dinner. She had no intention of eating. She heard his footsteps and turned to find him in the doorway, looking exhausted and older than his 32 years. "It's handled," he said. Then he crossed to her and held on like she was the only thing keeping him upright. That night, after they'd gone to bed, Roman told her what had happened in Chicago. The meetings that had turned confrontational, the threats barely disguised as questions, the moment when he'd had to remind everyone in the room that crossing him would cost more than cooperating. "I hate this," he said quietly, staring at the ceiling. "I hate that I'm good at it. That I can walk into a room full of dangerous men and make them afraid of me without raising my voice." Liana rolled onto her side, studying his profile in the darkness. "Do you want to stop? Really stop? Not just step back?" "I don't know if I can. The business is too big, too connected. People depend on it. Not just criminals, but legitimate businesses that use our services, families who work for us, communities that would collapse without the money we bring in." He turned to look at her. "And I don't know who I'd be without it. This is all I've known since I was 24. "You'd be a husband," Liana said softly. "And soon, a father. That's not nothing. It's not enough, though, is it?" Roman's voice was raw. "You deserve someone who comes home on time, who doesn't have to worry about federal investigations or rivals trying to send messages. Someone normal." "I don't want normal. I want you." She put his hand on her stomach, which had started to swell more noticeably. "We want you, exactly as you are." Roman's expression crumbled. He pulled her close and buried his face in her hair, and Liana felt wetness against her neck that she pretended not to notice. They fell asleep like that, and in the morning neither mentioned the conversation. But something had shifted. Roman started delegating more, trusting his second-in-command with decisions he used to handle personally. He installed a state-of-the-art security system throughout the estate and hired 2 additional guards whose only job was to watch Liana. "This is excessive," she told him after the 4th upgrade in as many weeks. "Humor me." He was reviewing camera footage, marking blind spots. "After the baby comes, I'll relax. Maybe." Liana doubted that, but didn't argue. She was starting to show obviously now, her body changing in ways that fascinated and terrified her in equal measure. Vivienne took her shopping for maternity clothes and baby supplies, insisting on the best of everything despite Liana's protests. "My grandchild will have the finest," Vivienne declared, ordering a crib that cost more than a car. Don't even try to argue. The pregnancy progressed normally through the winter. Liana felt the baby move for the first time in late December, a flutter that made her gasp and grab Roman's hand to press against her stomach. They spent Christmas quietly, just the 3 of them. And Liana realized this was the first holiday she'd ever had that felt like family. In January, they found out they were having a boy. Roman cried during the ultrasound, openly and without shame, holding Liana's hand so tightly she lost feeling in her fingers. "A son," he kept saying. "We're having a son." That night, he spent an hour with his hand on her belly, talking to their unborn child in Italian, words Liana didn't understand, but that sounded like promises and prayers all mixed together. "What are you telling him?" she asked. "That I'm going to do better than my father did. That I'm going to be present, not just provide. That he's going to know he matters more than any business, any empire, anything else in this world." Roman's eyes met hers. "That his mother is the strongest person I've ever known, and he's lucky to have her." Liana started crying then, Hormones and love and overwhelming gratitude all tangled up together. The nursery came together slowly. Roman painted it himself, refusing to hire someone, spending weekends in there with drop cloths and paint cans, creating something with his own hands for the first time in years. They chose a soft gray-blue for the walls, with white furniture and shelves that Roman built from scratch, working from plans he'd found online and modified until they were perfect. Liana watched him sand the edges of a changing table one Saturday afternoon, saw the concentration on his face, the care he put into making sure every corner was smooth and safe. "You're nesting," she teased. "I'm preparing." But he smiled. "Is that what you call it?" "That's what all the pregnancy books call it." Liana settled into the rocking chair they'd bought, resting her hands on her swollen stomach. The overwhelming urge to prepare everything before the baby comes. "Then, yeah, I'm nesting." Roman set down the sandpaper and came to kneel beside her chair. "I want everything perfect for him, Liana. I want him to come into a world that's ready for him, that's safe, that's full of love," she finished, "which it already is." In February, Vivian threw a baby shower that was supposed to be small but somehow ended up with 40 people and enough gifts to fill 2 rooms. Liana felt overwhelmed by the attention, by the women who touched her stomach without asking and offered advice she hadn't requested. But when she saw Roman across the room, talking with Marcus about installing additional locks on the nursery windows, she felt her anxiety settle. This was her family now. Complicated and imperfect, and sometimes too much, but hers. The shower marked a shift in how people in their world saw her. She wasn't just Roman's wife anymore. She was the mother of his heir, the woman who would give the DeLuca family its next generation. People who'd dismissed her before now treated her with deference that made her uncomfortable. "They're scared of what it means if they disrespect you," Vivian explained one afternoon. "You're not just Liana anymore. You're the future of this family." "I'm still just me, though. I haven't changed." "No, but your position has. Learn to use it." Vivian's smile was knowing. "There's power in being underestimated, dear. People will assume you're soft because you're kind. Let them, and then surprise them." Liana thought about that conversation a week later when one of Roman's associates made the mistake of trying to go around her to get to Roman. The man wanted a meeting, but Roman had refused, and apparently thought Liana would be easier to manipulate. "Mrs. DeLuca," he said, cornering her after dinner one evening when Roman was on a call. "Perhaps you could convince your husband to reconsider. This deal would benefit everyone. If it would benefit everyone, he wouldn't have said no." Liana kept her voice pleasant. "And I don't interfere in his business decisions." "Of course, I just thought, you thought wrong." She met his eyes steadily. "My husband makes his own decisions. I don't manipulate him into changing them, and I'd appreciate you not putting me in that position." The man backed off immediately, apologizing, and Liana walked away feeling oddly empowered. Vivian had been right. There was strength in setting boundaries, in refusing to be used. March brought warm weather and Braxton Hicks contractions that sent Roman into a panic the first time they happened. Liana had to call the doctor to convince him she wasn't in labor, that this was normal, that they still had 2 months before the baby was due. "I can't handle this," Roman said after the scare had passed. "I can stare down men with guns and not flinch, but you in pain makes me want to burn the world down." "Good thing I'm not in pain then." Liana squeezed his hand. "Just practice contractions. The real ones will be worse." "That's not helping." They took a childbirth class at Vivian's insistence, sitting in a room full of other expectant couples and learning breathing techniques that Roman took more seriously than any business negotiation. He practiced with Liana every night, counting her breaths, timing fake contractions, preparing for the moment when everything would become real. "You're going to be great at this," Liana told him after one particularly intense practice session. "I'm terrified." "Me too." She leaned against him. "But we're terrified together, so that's something." In April, 3 weeks before her due date, Liana woke in the middle of the night to find the bed wet and Roman sitting up beside her, his phone already in his hand. "Is this—" he started. "My water just broke." Oh, Liana's heart was racing. "This is happening. Oh God, this is happening." The next 12 hours were a blur of pain and breathing, and Roman holding her hand through every contraction, while Vivian paced the hospital hallway, and Marcus stationed himself outside the door like he was guarding state secrets. The doctors told her she was progressing well, that everything was normal, but Liana couldn't process any of it through the waves of pain that kept getting stronger and closer together. Roman never left her side, counting breaths and wiping her forehead and telling her she was strong. She was doing great, just a little longer. "I can't," she gasped during a particularly brutal contraction. "Roman, I can't do this." "Yes, you can." His voice was fierce. "You're the strongest person I know, Liana. You can do anything." When the doctor finally said it was time to push, Liana was so exhausted she could barely stay conscious. But Roman was there, his arm around her shoulders, his voice in her ear, coaching her through each push with the same intensity he brought to everything else. And then, after what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, there was a cry, high and angry and absolutely perfect. "It's a boy," the doctor said, and suddenly there was a tiny screaming bundle being placed on Liana's chest, all red face and flailing limbs, and more real than anything she'd ever experienced. "Oh," she breathed. "Oh, look at him." Roman was crying openly, his hand cradling this baby's head with infinite gentleness. "He's perfect. Liana, he's perfect." They named him Vincent, after Roman's father, with James as a middle name for no particular reason, except that it sounded right. Vincent James DeLuca, 7 pounds, 3 ounces, born at 4:47 in the afternoon with his father's dark hair and his mother's nose. Vivian came in to meet her grandson and cried harder than either of them, holding Vincent like he was made of glass and promising him the world in whispered Italian. That first night in the hospital, after Vivian had gone home and Vincent was sleeping in his bassinet beside the bed, Roman sat in the chair next to Liana and just stared at their son. "I thought I knew what love was," he said quietly. "I thought what I felt for you was the deepest I could go. But this—" He gestured helplessly at the sleeping baby. "This is different. This is terrifying." "Because now there's something you'd die for," Liana said, understanding completely. "Something I'd kill for, too, without hesitation." Roman's voice was flat, honest. "Anyone who threatens him, Liana, I won't show mercy." "I know." And she did. She'd married into this world with her eyes open, accepted the violence that came with loving Roman. Their son would grow up protected by that same violence, sheltered inside an empire built on blood and fear. The thought should have horrified her. Instead, she just felt grateful that her child would never know the kind of abandonment and loneliness she'd experienced. They brought Vincent home 3 days later to an estate that had been baby-proofed within an inch of its life. Roman carried the car seat like it contained explosives, moving so carefully that Liana had to suppress a laugh. "He's not going to break," she said. "You don't know that." The first few weeks were hard in ways Liana hadn't anticipated. Vincent didn't sleep more than 2 hours at a stretch, and when he wasn't sleeping, he was usually crying. Liana was exhausted and overwhelmed, and her body hurt in places she didn't know could hurt. But Roman was there for all of it. He changed diapers and walked the floors at 3 in the morning and figured out how to swaddle better than Liana could. He delegated even more of his business, trusting his people to handle things while he focused on his family. "I never thought I'd see the day," Marcus commented one afternoon, watching Roman rock Vincent while reviewing reports one-handed. The great Roman DeLuca, brought to his knees by a 7-pound baby. "Best thing that ever happened to me," Roman said without looking up. "Both of them." When Vincent was 6 weeks old, Roman called a meeting of his top associates. Liana didn't attend. She was still recovering, and Vincent needed her. But she heard about it later from Vivian, who'd been there as an observer. Roman had stood in front of 20 men who controlled various aspects of his operation and told them that things were changing, that he was stepping back from day-to-day operations, promoting his second-in-command to handle most of the decisions, focusing instead on strategy and oversight. "Some of you won't like this," he'd said, his voice carrying the quiet authority that made people listen. "Some of you will see it as weakness. Let me be clear, it's not. It's a choice. I'm choosing to be present for my family while I still can, while my son is young enough to need me. Anyone who has a problem with that can say so now." No one had said anything, because even stepping back, Roman was still the most powerful man in the room, and everyone knew it. The changes were gradual but significant. Roman started working from home more, taking meetings in his office instead of traveling to other cities. He hired people he trusted to handle the things he used to do himself, and he carved out time every day to be with Vincent, feeding him, playing with him, reading to him, even though Vincent was too young to understand the words. Liana watched her husband transform into a father and felt something heal inside her own heart. This was what family was supposed to look like. Not perfect. They still fought, still struggled, still had moments of doubt and fear, but real, present, committed. By the time Vincent was 6 months old, sitting up and babbling and reaching for everything with chubby hands, Liana realized she couldn't remember what her life had been like before all of this. Before Roman, before the estate, before becoming part of something larger than herself. One evening, she found Roman in the nursery, just sitting in the rocking chair and watching Vincent sleep. She leaned against the doorframe, not wanting to interrupt the moment. "What are you thinking about?" she asked quietly. Roman didn't startle, had probably heard her coming. "About how I almost pushed you away, that night after Victor's daughter died, when I tried to convince you to leave. But I didn't." "No, you didn't." He looked up at her and his eyes were serious. "I've been thinking about that a lot lately, about the choices we make and how they ripple out. If you'd listened to me that night, if you'd left like I told you to, none of this would exist. Vincent wouldn't be here. We wouldn't be here." Liana moved into the room, settled into his lap even though she was bigger now than she'd been before the pregnancy. "But I knew something you didn't." "What's that?" "That love is worth the risk, always." She touched his face, felt the stubble that had grown in since morning. "You were trying to protect me from a future that might hurt. But I'd rather have this, all of it, the danger and the fear and the uncertainty, than spend my life safe but alone." Roman kissed her then, soft and thorough, and when they pulled apart, he rested his forehead against hers. "I don't deserve you," he said for probably the 100th time since they'd met. "Good thing I don't care what you deserve." She kissed him again. "I care what I choose, and I choose this. I choose you. Every day." Vincent made a small noise in his sleep, and they both turned to look at him. He was growing so fast, changing every day, becoming more himself with each week that passed. Liana wondered who he'd become, what kind of man he'd grow into with Roman as his father and this complicated world as his inheritance. When Vincent turned 1, they threw a party that was somehow both intimate and enormous. Close family and friends filled the estate, and Vincent toddled around in a tiny suit that made him look like a miniature version of Roman, charming everyone with his gap-toothed smile and determined independence. Liana watched Roman chase their son around the garden, heard his laughter echoing off the walls, and felt overwhelming gratitude for the path that had led her here. From an orphan bouncing through foster care to a woman standing in a mansion, married to a man who loved her fiercely, mother to a child who would never know abandonment or loneliness. "You've done well," Vivian said, coming to stand beside her. "Both of you have." "I was terrified," Liana admitted. "When I first started working here, when I realized I was falling in love with your son, I was so scared it would all fall apart. And yet here you are." Vivian smiled. "Stronger than you knew, braver than you thought, exactly what this family needed." That night, after the guests had left and Vincent was asleep in his crib, Liana and Roman sat in their bedroom and talked about the future. "I've been thinking about the foundation," Roman said. He'd mentioned it before. A charitable organization his mother wanted to establish, something to give back to the community, to use their wealth for something besides maintaining power. "What about it?" "I think we should do it, really commit to it, focus on foster care maybe, since that's where you came from. Give kids opportunities they wouldn't have otherwise." Liana stared at him. "You're serious?" "Completely." Roman took her hand. "I can't undo the violence I've committed, the lives I've destroyed building and maintaining this empire. But maybe I can balance it out a little. Give something back. Create something good. That's..." Liana's throat was tight. "That's a beautiful idea. It was my mother's originally, but I want us to run it, you and me. Something we build together that isn't about the business, that's just about helping people who need it." They spent the next several months working with lawyers and accountants to establish the foundation. The DeLuca Family Foundation focused on foster care reform and education opportunities for underprivileged children. They funded group homes and scholarship programs and mentorship initiatives, using their wealth and connections to create pathways for kids like Liana had been. It didn't erase the darkness in Roman's past, didn't make his business legitimate or wash away the blood money that funded it. But it was something. A gesture toward redemption, toward using their privilege for something besides self-protection and power consolidation. Liana threw herself into the work, interviewing program directors and visiting facilities and ensuring that the money went where it would make the most difference. Roman supported her fully, attending events and writing checks, and slowly, gradually, becoming known for something besides his reputation as a ruthless enforcer of order. Vincent grew up surrounded by this duality, the violence implicit in his father's business and the generosity of the foundation that bore their name. He was too young to understand it yet, but someday he'd have to reconcile those two truths about his family. Someday he'd have to decide who he wanted to be and what kind of legacy he wanted to build. But that was years away. For now, he was just a little boy learning to walk and talk, utterly certain that his parents loved him and that he was safe. When Vincent was 2, Liana found herself pregnant again. The news was both a shock and somehow inevitable. She and Roman had stopped being careful, had fallen into a rhythm of intimacy that didn't include planning or prevention. "Another one," Roman said when she told him, his hand immediately going to her still flat stomach. "Are you okay with this? Are you?" She searched his face. "I'm terrified and excited in equal measure, just like last time." He pulled her close. "But yes, I'm more than okay with it." This pregnancy was easier than the first. Liana knew what to expect, knew how to manage the symptoms, knew that the exhaustion and nausea would pass. Vincent provided entertaining distraction, and watching Roman juggle a toddler while preparing for another baby was sometimes hilarious. They found out they were having a girl in the 5th month. Roman cried again, just like he had with Vincent, and immediately started planning how he'd protect her from every possible threat. "She's not even born yet, and you're already being overprotective," Liana teased. "Wait until she's 16 and boys start noticing her," Roman said darkly. "I'm buying more guns." Their daughter was born in late fall, 3 weeks early, but healthy and loud. They named her Sophia Rose, and she had Liana's green eyes and a temperament that suggested she'd inherited her father's stubbornness. Vincent was fascinated by his baby sister, insisting on helping with everything and getting upset when she cried. Roman navigated fatherhood of 2 with the same intensity he brought to everything else, and Liana watched their family grow with a sense of completion she'd never expected to feel. 5 years after Liana had first walked into the DeLuca estate as a nervous cook, she stood in the garden and watched her children play while Roman and Vivian argued good-naturedly about something trivial. The foundation was thriving, helping hundreds of kids every year. Roman had scaled back his business even further, focusing on legitimate ventures and letting his second-in-command handle most of the criminal operations. They weren't perfect. Roman still had moments where his past caught up to him, where violence was necessary to protect what they'd built. Liana still struggled sometimes with the moral complexity of loving someone whose wealth came from illegal sources, and their children would grow up bearing the weight of their family's reputation, for better or worse. But they had each other. They had built something real and lasting out of an impossible situation. They had proven that love could survive in even the darkest environments, that people could change without erasing who they'd been. That family was something you created rather than something you were born into. "What are you thinking about?" Roman asked, coming to stand beside her. Liana leaned into him, watching Sophia toddle after her brother with determined concentration. "About how different my life is from what I imagined. How I thought I'd always be alone, always be that foster kid who didn't belong anywhere. And now I can't imagine being anywhere else." She turned to look at him, this man who'd given her everything she'd never known to ask for. "Thank you for seeing me, for loving me, for building this with me." Roman kissed her forehead, his arms tight around her waist. "Thank you for staying, for not running when I gave you every reason to, for being brave enough to love me back." They stood there as the sun set over the estate, painting everything in shades of gold and amber, their children's laughter echoing through the garden. The future was uncertain, full of challenges that they couldn't predict and dangers they couldn't always protect against. But they would face it together, this family they'd built from loneliness and longing and the simple revolutionary act of choosing each other. And that, Liana thought, was more than enough. It was everything.